This month, we saw the release of the RTX 4060 Ti 16GB version at $500. I'll tell you later why you shouldn't buy that and what you should buy instead at that price point. Although in general, in the probably $400 to $600 price point, it might make sense to wait. We have a lot of reason to believe that next week at Gamescom, we will be seeing AMD announce their RX 7800 XT and 7700 XT GPUs. That's not completely official, although Radeon Division has said that they are for sure announcing their next major product. They didn't say specifically that it would be these GPUs. Now, depending on how they choose to price these GPUs, they may not end up shaking up that market segment at all, although we can hope. But again, for a lot of people, it would be worthwhile to at least wait and see. Now, I doubt these products would actually launch next week. We would expect to maybe hear announcements about them. Also, if we did hear something about FSR 3, which we've been waiting forever for, that could shake up some of the value proposition when considering buying an AMD versus Nvidia GPU, but again, we'll have to wait and see on that. Also this month, AMD is offering a Starfield bundle, sometimes the standard edition and sometimes the Starfield premium edition with various CPUs and GPUs, but basically any of the 6,000 or 7,000 GPUs, at least starting with the RX 6600, so not the 6500 or 6400 cards, will at least get you some version of Starfield in the deal as long as you're buying it from an eligible retailer, which you would want to check in about. Now, Nvidia also has a bundle deal going on right now. It looks like an Overwatch 2 Invasion bundle deal with their RTX 40 series GPUs. Personally, that sounds like the less compelling option, but if you're somebody who does play Overwatch 2 a lot, it's possible you'll find some value in these bundled goodies along the way. And in general, to pay for your GPU upgrade, you should sell your old hardware to pay for your upgrade. A lot of people leave money on the table, which gets them getting a card less performant than what they could have by selling their previous hardware. Now, today's sponsor, Jawa.gg, gives you some really excellent options for doing this. One option is to list the card for sale yourself. You manage the listing, you pick the price, you create the listing, a gamer buys your graphics card, you ship out the card within 3 business days, you get paid 2 days after the buyer receives the GPU. However, what's really interesting about Jawa is that they offer a hassle-free option with no need to wait for a buyer or manage the listing yourself at all. You sell the GPU directly to Jawa by telling them your GPU model and condition. They offer you a price immediately. You ship your GPU to Jawa. They receive it, inspect it, and pay you within 1 business day. It's as simple as clicking Get an Offer, and this link will be included in the video description and a pinned comment. Now, let's jump into which GPUs actually make sense to buy at different price points. First of all, I'm focusing on the new market. If you want to look at used options, Jawa is another great, also great to check to buy used GPUs. However, I'll be focusing on new listings, and right now we have seen some movement on a lot of GPUs. However, it hasn't always been for the better. For example, the RX 6600 from AMD, which does come with that Starfield bundle, has been my recommended GPU under $200 for a while now. You've been frequently able to find it for about $180. However, today, if I had to buy one new, the lowest I'm seeing is $205. That makes it a little bit less compelling, and the Intel Arc A750 has moved down to $200 again. So this is putting Intel into its most easy to recommend position I've seen it in a long time with their A750. If you wanted to buy something from Nvidia in this price point, you can't get anything from the 40 series. The RTX 3050 comes down to about $230, but honestly, the RX 6600 and the Arc A750 are frequently going to outperform the RTX 3050 in this price class. Now, this is pretty interesting. Intel, however, though, I'm not going to give it a hands-down recommendation. Just due to the fact that while its software support has gotten significantly better, since they're a newer player to the discrete graphics card market, a lot of their support for older games that released a long time before Intel produced these graphics cards, the support is sometimes hit or miss on them working correctly or performing well. However, this has gotten significantly better since launch. So I'm going to give a split recommendation between the Arc A750 for some people who want to probably get more performance than the RX 6600 in a lot of cases, but sometimes have to deal with some headaches. And I'll give the RX 6600 my recommendation for anybody who finds value in the Starfield bundle and or just wants most likely a smoother sailing experience. The Arc A750 also has an AV1 encoder, which can be useful for streaming to platforms like YouTube. I don't believe Twitch supports it at this point in time, whereas the RX 6600 still has encoding available, just not the newer AV1 encoding. Now, if we go past this price point, things get really muddy on what to recommend. Honestly, the next thing I would probably want to jump up to has usually been the 6700 XT from AMD, which is frequently around $320, and I've even seen it go as low as $300 new on Prime Day from Amazon, but is currently back up around $330, which makes it a little less exciting than it has been in the past. But again, if you do find some value in the Starfield bundle, that could bring a little more punch to the argument there. The main reason why I say maybe jump up to the 6700 XT if you can get it is the 12 gigabytes of VRAM. I've recently tested how limiting 8 gigabytes of VRAM is in the latest AAA single-player games, and at the highest graphics settings, it definitely does cause some limitations, and VRAM usage in games always goes up over time, not down on average. So having that 8 gigabytes of VRAM is certainly nice. So my next card I would really want to step up to would be the 6700 XT, although I wish it was back to being priced more in that $300 to $320 range. So it's kind of a little sad to see it creeping up. And again, we could start to see supply dwindle on these as AMD moves to launching its replacement. The 6700 XT, now, what does it compete against in this price point? There's cards like the RTX 4060 from Nvidia, if you want to move to Nvidia in this price point. The 4060 launched at $300. You can find some models as low as $290 right now. It's an 8 gigabyte card. It does have some reasons to consider it over the 6700 XT, although the raw performance lead is absolutely in the 6700 XT's favor, and the 6700 XT has 50% more VRAM. The 4060 can take some leads in very heavy ray tracing workloads, but in lighter ray tracing workloads or with ray tracing off, it's generally tied or taking even sometimes a fairly significant loss. And the 4060 does draw a lot less energy consumption. So if you're in a smaller case, have a smaller power supply, things like that could, or live somewhere where energy consumption is super high, there are some things going for it there. Also, if you're thinking about Nvidia versus AMD in general, the big standout differences are for gaming performance is ray tracing. But again, if the AMD card, think about it like this, AMD cards can do ray tracing, they just lose a higher percentage of their baseline performance when it's enabled, and the heavier duty ray tracing titles, take a bigger and bigger hit. The Nvidia cards also take a hit to performance, but it tends to be less of their overall performance that they're losing by enabling those features. But if the AMD card starts out far enough ahead, then maybe it still comes out ahead in some ray tracing workloads or doesn't lose too badly. The Nvidia cards will also have access to a better upscaler. AMD's FSR2 looks pretty good, but DLSS 2 does look better. The 40 series cards from Nvidia also have access to frame generation. Frame generation inserts generated frames in between two real frames, which does add some latency to the gameplay. So rather than, usually when you get more frame rate, higher frame rate in a game, it increases the responsiveness. Frame generation doesn't do that, but it does smooth out the image on a high refresh rate monitor. But you're going to want a high enough base frame rate for it to look good and feel good to use, and you would only want to use it in single-player games due to the responsiveness, factor, and only certain games support it. So it's certainly a value-added feature, but not going to apply to every game. It also does use some VRAM, and I have seen in my testing that sometimes you could be at settings where you're really, really close to 8 gigabytes of VRAM usage already. You enable frame generation, and then it can add a few more stutters to the frame time graph, that kind of thing. So again, this would have been really nice to get more than 8 gigabytes of VRAM on the 4060. That being said, if you do want to go with the Nvidia feature set, that would be a place to go. And while my video focuses on gaming performance, there are also certain productivity workloads that are and applications that are programmed with Nvidia's CUDA cores in mind. And you might get, but you'll want to research your productivity workflow separately from your gaming performance. Look at the specific apps and work that you use in your workflow to see what would work better here. Also in this price range, we would see the Arc A770 from Intel. However, if you're going to go with an Intel GPU, the A770 is not much faster than the A750, but it costs a lot more money. Despite having 16 gigabytes of VRAM, that's not enough reason to justify the $100 price premium to go from the A750 8 gigabyte to the A770 16 gigabyte. And I don't think the A770 16 gigabyte at $300 is very competitive up against the 6700 XT, which is just a little bit more money from AMD, or even the 4060 from Nvidia. So I don't think the A770 makes sense here. Now, if you have to buy something in between the $200 and $300 mark, there's a lot of options. AMD's RX 7600 does get you fairly close to the rasterized, or in other words, non-ray traced performance of the RTX 4060. And at these lower, price points and performance tiers, I think that using ray tracing is often something that you'd actually turn off anyway. A lot of times it makes more sense to turn down graphic settings to increase performance rather than to crank all of the features like ray tracing at this price point in order to get... in other words, it makes sense to boost performance by turning things down rather than crank all the visual settings, in which case the RX 7600 at $255 on the cheapest models can get you a lot of the performance that a 4060 would. One of the problems with it is that the previous generation 6650 XT from AMD is currently available as low as $235 right now and is only slightly behind the 7600 in performance. The 7600 has the AV1 encoder from the newer generation, but other than that, it does not offer a lot of newer features than the 6650 XT. So if you had to buy something between $200 and $300, I'd probably say the 6650 XT at $235 makes the most sense. Anyway, so if we go past the RX 6700 XT, though, things start to get a little bit difficult to recommend. The next GPU from Nvidia is the 4060 Ti, which launched at $400. The good news is there are some models available right now new for as low as $380, which makes me hate it less. But it is still an 8 gigabyte card, and that is a lot of money to pay for an 8 gigabyte card. Again, I have demonstrated in my testing showing the 4060 Ti 8 gigabyte versus the 16 gigabyte model that you absolutely are leaving performance on the table in situations where you do actually have the GPU power to run those graphic settings and resolutions by being limited to the 8 gigabytes, and that just kind of feels bad. And the 6700 XT, can get you close to this performance when you're not ray tracing for less money. So again, that makes the 4060 Ti 8 gigabyte a bit of a hard sell, but there's not a lot directly competing at it at exactly this $380 price point where I'm seeing the lowest models. From AMD, if you're willing to go up to $430, they do have the 6800 non-XT version, which is a 16 gigabyte graphics card and has more raw performance than the 4060 Ti 8 gigabyte, doubles the VRAM so you won't have those issues. Although it will draw more power than the 4060 Ti and, doesn't have the newer AV1 encoding, doesn't have the DLSS, that type of thing, but does have more raw performance and a lot more VRAM. And honestly, at the $430 price point, again, it's kind of just on its own thing right here. This is where also I'm hoping, but not necessarily expecting, AMD to kind of shake up this price point soon with their 7800 XT and 7700 XT, hopefully. Now, if you are going to go up to the $500 price point, I can finally definitively give you this is the GPU you should buy at this price point. The 6800 XT from AMD is as low as $510 right now. At $510, it costs about the same as the competing 4060 Ti 16 gigabyte version. And the 16 gigabyte 4060 Ti, while it finally has enough VRAM, is now just completely overpriced at the $500 price point. If this version of the card was more in that $400 or less or $380 price point, I think we'd actually have something. But at the $500 price point, you're seeing the 4060 Ti 16 gigabyte up against the 6800 XT, and the 6800 XT is significantly faster in most situations, often even including ray tracing situations. So despite the, some of the NVIDIA feature set advantage, even enabling something like DLSS quality isn't necessarily going to get it to pass the performance of the 6800 XT running the game natively without the upscaling image quality compromises. Now, if we go past this point, we could go up to the $600 price point, where once again, I'm going to give a bit of a split recommendation. The RTX 4070 is the first GPU from NVIDIA's 40 series where I feel like its specs at least make sense. This GPU gives you 12 gigabytes of VRAM, and while it would to have more, in current games, 12 gigabytes is enough at 1080p and 1440p. The only question is, will it continue to be enough for as many years as you will hang on to this GPU? That's a bit more of the question mark, but at least right now, 12 gigabytes of VRAM does get the job done. And the 4070 is strong enough to perform extremely well at both 1080p and 1440p, and especially at 1440p, DLSS quality upscaling looks quite good. And again, you would also get access to the frame generation feature, and the card is very energy efficient, has the AV1 encoding. I just would have liked to see this GPU priced at $500. It's going to give you about the same non-ray trace performance as the 6800 XT, which costs $510 right now, versus $590 on the 4070. So if you can't push to the $600 mark, the 6800 XT gets you very similar performance and a bit more VRAM with less features and more energy consumption, right, and less ray tracing performance for a bit less money. The RTX 4070 is a direct price competitor against the 6950 XT, which has been up as high as $630 recently, but is now, I'm seeing available again right now for $590. So exactly the same price as the RTX 4070. When these cost exactly the same, I give a split recommendation, and I'm going to ask you which of these sounds better to you. The 6950 XT is going to give you more raw performance when you're not using ray tracing, and in lighter ray tracing workloads might even be about the same performance. In heavier ray tracing workloads, the 4070 can pull ahead. Also, the 4070 does have DLSS upscaling advantage, which I think at 1440p resolution can make a lot of sense to use. I think realistically a lot of people would be using that. And then again, you do have the situational feature of frame generation, which in certain single-player games, when you're getting high enough base frame rate, which the 4070 is often able to do, can be a good way to smooth out the image on a high refresh rate monitor. But one of the biggest distinctions here is think about your case and your power supply. The RTX 4070 is generally going to be smaller and draw a lot less energy, which means it's putting out a lot less heat into your case, and it won't need as big of a power supply. The 6950 XT is generally very large. The cheapest model here, the $590 option, is 340 millimeters long, draws a lot of power, so you would need a compatible power supply. And again, doesn't have the newer features and AV1 encoding and all of that. But in terms of just raw performance, if you have the space and the power supply to support it, I do see some people would choose the 6950 XT here. Some people would go for the lower energy consumption and better feature package on the 4070. I'll give a split recommendation here. I don't love either of these. I really wish the 4070 would come down to about $500 and make it a lot easier to recommend. The next price point that we jump up to here on the NVIDIA side of things would be the 4070 Ti. Now, this is a massive price jump. The cheapest models now are available at $790. That is a $200 price jump over the RTX 4070. And you still only get the 12 gigabytes of VRAM. Now, I've said that 12 gigabytes of VRAM is pretty much okay at 1440p right now, but a lot of games are right on that borderline. And the 4070 Ti at $800, you might even be considering a 4K monitor. And there are some situations where at 4K resolution, we are seeing current games going past 12 gigabytes. And again, just spending $800 for a 12 gigabyte card at a time when we're already seeing games pushing right up to that and past it feels pretty bad. So our competition against the 4070 Ti is the 7900 XT from AMD. The cheapest models of these right now are available at $760, and this is a 20 gigabyte graphics card and gives you more raw, non-ray traced performance than the 4070 Ti does, albeit at a bit higher energy consumption. And again, without some of the, it does have the AV1 encoding because we're, on the newer generation now. But it doesn't have, it has FSR2 upscaling, which looks good, but not as good as DLSS and doesn't currently have frame generation. Again, hopefully we hear from AMD about their FSR3 competitor. This is going to be another split recommendation from me. When the 7900 XT first launched at $900, it was a laughably bad value and nobody should have considered it. Luckily, that's forced its price down, so now at actually a bit of a price discount, but about the same price realistically, $760 versus $790, pretty close at that high of a price range, versus the 4070 Ti. I would say that at 4K resolution, I would give a nod to the 7900 XT for its extra VRAM and a bit more raw performance. Whereas at 1440p, I'll give more of a split recommendation because I'm less bothered by the 12 gigabytes of VRAM on the 4070 Ti at 1440p resolution. Also, AMD's upscaling tech FSR, I think the higher the resolution is, the less the visual quality kind of falls back noticeably compared to DLSS. FSR2 quality at 4K resolution generally looks very good. At the lower resolutions, especially like 1080p, I have more trouble recommending it. But so here I'll give a split recommendation. 4K, I'd probably nod to the 7900 XT, and at 1440p, a bit more split. I could see people going either way if you wanted the NVIDIA feature set and weren't too worried about the 12 gigabytes of VRAM and a bit less raw performance. The 4070 Ti is strong enough at 1440p that using ray tracing is a very realistic option, especially if you kick on DLSS quality and maybe even frame generation. Whereas at 4K resolution, I think you'd start to have to use upscaling really aggressively, which leads to use ray tracing, which is going to lose you a bit of the image quality that you kind of started out with anyway. Now, past this point, the next GPU up is the 7900 XTX. The extra X at the end does get you a noticeably more performance, but also now cost $920. At $920, price point-wise, there is no direct competitor to the 7900 XTX. Performance-wise, the next direct competitor is the RTX 4080. But the RTX 4080 does cost $1,100 currently. That is $100 below where it started out at $1,200. Now, if I was given the chance to choose between these two GPUs at exactly the same price, I would choose the RTX 4080. Granted, it only has 16 gigabytes of VRAM versus the 24 gigabytes on the 7900 XTX, but I do feel good about 16 gigabytes of VRAM right now and for the next few years. So I'm not too concerned about that myself. Also, again, you get noticeably better energy efficiency and a better feature set, and their raw performance is about the same. You might get a slight bit better non-ray trace performance on the 7900 XTX, but it's not too big of a lead. And then once you do enable ray tracing, the 4080 does come out ahead. So I do think the 4080 is worth more money than the 7900 XTX. The question is it worth a $200 price gap? So in other words, the RTX 4080 is going to get my $1,100 recommendation, and the 7900 XTX is going to get my $900 recommendation, and they do not currently, at least in price, directly compete with each other. So they'll get separate recommendations in those price tiers without direct competitors. That leaves us with the RTX 4090. which still costs around $1,600, but it is still by far the most capable 4K GPU. And if you want to do high refresh rate ray tracing at 1440p without a lot of upscaling required, it's also going to be the best choice there, and definitely means that, you know, you're paying a lot more money, but you're definitely getting a lot more performance for that. This does definitely outperform both the 7900 XTX and the RTX 4080, but you're paying out the nose. So if, you know, don't go into debt to get this thing. But if $1,600 doesn't make you sweat or anything, you're definitely getting something for the money going with the RTX 4090. All right, hopefully you guys found this breakdown of the differences between the different GPU brands and all of that, you know, and different recommendations at each price point useful. It's kind of a bit of a summary. If you have an unlimited budget, get yourself a 4090. Best GPU at $1,100 was the 4080. Best GPU at $900 was the 7900 XTX. The $800 price point was a bit more of a split recommendation between the 7900 XT and the 4070 Ti. With, you know, if you're going to 4K resolution, me giving you a bit more of a nod to the 7900 XT model. And at 1440p, a little more okay with the split recommendation. Maybe people would be more drawn to the feature set on the 4070 Ti. $600 price point was a split between recommendation between the 6950 XT and the RTX 4070. They cost the same. But again, the 6950 XT is going to be a lot bigger, draw a lot more power. If it's not going to fit in your case or your power supply, the 4070 might make the most sense. Also, if you're more drawn toward the feature set than the raw performance, again, the 4070 isn't a terrible decision over it. So split recommendation based on which of those you're more drawn to. And then at the $500 price point, I can give you a solid recommendation with the RX 6800 XT. It's miles better than the 4060 Ti 16 gigabyte. And then down below that, things got really messy. I think the standouts were the 6700 XT because it gets you 12 gigabytes of VRAM and a lot of performance at one of the lower cost points for that. With the Intel Arc A770 being the only other high VRAM GPU down at the $300 price point, but not giving you enough, you know, performance to go along with it. And then down at the $200 price point, split recommendation between the probably more consistently performant RX 6600 from AMD and the, you know, a little more risky on the software side of things, but pretty interesting at the price point, Intel Arc A750. And then if you had to buy something between the $200 and $300 range, there's a lot of possible options, but the $235 6650 XT seemed to stand out for me there. Hopefully this was useful, and hopefully we will find out more about the potential 7800 XT and 7700 XT from AMD soon. Maybe even some FSR3 updates. Is that too much to ask for? Definitely stay tuned to the channel. I do one of these recommendations based on the latest performance and the latest pricing updates every single month. And if you're more interested in the head-to-head comparisons I've shown here, those are all clips from dedicated videos where I go into much more detail between all of these GPUs. Huge thank you to channel members and today's sponsor, Jawa.gg. Again, sell your old hardware there to help fund your upgrade and take a look at their used options if all of this new stuff is just out of your price range. I hope all of you have an excellent day.